In the heart of Enugu, nestled between red clay hills and echoing drums of dreams, lived Amara, a woman whose beauty was only rivaled by the depth of her sacrifice. She married Uzachukwu at 26, a man with charm on his tongue but dust in his pocket. They had nothing except hope, and Amara, who worked as a school teacher, brought home every naira while Uzachukwu dreamed aloud about owning his logistics company. It wasn't long before her savings went into registering his business, buying the first rickety van, and fueling his ambitions. When the money wasn't enough, Amara sold her late father's ancestral land in Nsukka, ignoring the cries of her relatives who accused her of madness. But Amara saw something they didn't. A man who could rise if given enough wind. What she didn't foresee was how that wind could blow love away. Uzachukwu promised her wealth, houses, and laughter. In the early years, they lived humbly in a 2-room apartment with peeling paint and a leaking roof, but Amara didn't mind. She cooked with firewood and prayed under candlelight, waiting for the return on her investment. Not in riches, but in loyalty and love. Years passed, and Uzachukwu's logistics business took off like wildfire during the Harmattan. Amara remembered vividly the day he came home with the first brand-new delivery truck, dancing and lifting her up like a feather. That night, she felt the flame of their shared struggle rekindle in his touch, and she told herself the years of sacrifice had finally borne fruit. But as the money grew, so did the distance. Uzachukwu no longer asked for her advice, but instead attended parties she wasn't invited to, returning home with the scent of strange perfumes and the audacity to blame her for his disinterest. "You're too plain now, Amara," he said one evening, sipping whiskey she never liked. "A man with status needs a woman that dazzles." Her heart cracked then, but she still tried, changing her hairstyle, wearing makeup she wasn't used to, even joining a gym. Nothing worked. Worse still, Uzachukwu began bringing women home, sometimes laughing with them in their living room while Amara cooked in silence. The ultimate betrayal came when she walked into their bedroom one Sunday afternoon to find him in bed with a girl young enough to be their daughter. That day, Amara didn't cry. She simply turned around, went into the guest room, and sat by the window watching the mango tree sway, already knowing what she had to do. She had given everything for his rise. Now, she would take everything for her dignity. Uzachukwu believed he was untouchable. With every million that hit his account, a new vice took root in his heart. He wore designer suits like armor, walked into clubs like a king, and treated Amara like a servant who had outlived her usefulness. To the outside world, he was a respectable businessman, one of Enugu's rising elite. But inside the gates of their new duplex in Independence Layout, he was a tyrant, rude, reckless, and dripping with arrogance. Amara, however, remained silent. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was watchfulness. While he celebrated his fake freedom, she took control of the details. Unbeknownst to him, she had quietly ensured that the name on the deed to the house, the company papers, and even the bank accounts remained hers. During the years of building the business, Uzachukwu had trusted her with all the paperwork because she was meticulous and too dull to ever cheat, as he once joked to his friends. But what he failed to understand was that the woman he called dull had been quietly studying him the way a hunter studies a boastful lion, calmly waiting for when the beast forgets that pride comes before a fall. There were signs he could have noticed, moments of subtle resistance Amara introduced like smoke before fire. She stopped asking where he was going or when he would return. She stopped nagging or questioning him about lipstick stains or text messages from strange numbers. She simply smiled, as though she finally understood something deeper than his betrayal. He thought she had resigned. Instead, she had begun moving chess pieces. She hired a private investigator, not out of curiosity, but for evidence, not for justice in court, but to ensure her heart never tried to forgive what it saw. Amara opened separate savings and liquidated her shares in silence, sending money to trusted accounts she set up under aliases. Each time Yuzachukwu threw a wad of cash at her to shut her up, she smiled sweetly, took it, and transferred it to her escape plan. He laughed with his mistresses in hotels, unaware that Amara was creating a reality where he would one day knock on a gate that refused to open. The day he signed the final transfer deed to a property in Abuja without reading the document, trusting her to handle it as usual, was the day the noose tightened. But Amara still waited, not because she doubted the outcome, but because revenge, like pepper soup, must be served boiling hot, and on a clean dish. Amara had mastered the art of playing invisible. While Yuzachukwu laughed loudly with his friends in their compound and shared jokes about his quiet village wife, she became the shadow in the corridors of her own home, present but ignored. She cooked meals without salt when he brought women home, then added extra spice the days she knew he'd eat alone. It wasn't revenge, it was ritual. Every slight, every humiliation, she absorbed like a sponge, until her silence became heavier than any word. Yuzachukwu didn't notice that she had changed the house help 3 times in 1 month, each girl more discreet than the last. He didn't ask why his favorite wristwatch went missing, or why the Wi-Fi password was always Amarone's all01. When he did ask, she chuckled softly and said, "It's easy to remember." He laughed too, not knowing the joke was on him. His new routine of bringing girls to their marital bed became so frequent that Amara began to sleep in the guest room permanently. The guards and staff, once loyal to him, slowly began turning to her. Not by bribes, but by quiet observation. They saw who paid their salaries, who cared when their children fell ill, and who ultimately held the real keys. One rainy night, Yuzachukwu came home drunk, reeking of gin and female perfume, only to find the gates of his own house locked. He honked like a madman until the guard strolled out with an apologetic expression. "Oga, madam say no entry after 10 p.m. for security reasons." He stormed out of his car, cursing the heavens and demanding the keys, but no one moved. When Amara appeared at the window upstairs, her silhouette backlit by warm light, she simply asked, "Yuzo, do you have a visitor's pass?" For a moment, silence reigned, heavy and unyielding. He laughed nervously, thinking it a joke. "Amara, open this gate." "You day mad." Her voice returned, calm and clear. "You've been treating me like a stranger in my own house. I'm just finally respecting the boundaries you set." He slept in his car that night, soaked and furious. But that was only the beginning. By morning, he found his access to the company bank account restricted. His accountant claimed it was a system glitch. But the truth was deeper. The house, the cars, the logistics empire, all still legally belonged to Amara. And while he played the fool, she was already setting a trap with steel edges. It was no longer a question of if he would fall. It was when, and how hard. The morning after he slept in his car, Yuzachukwu burst into the house like a storm, his anger barely contained. Amara was seated at the dining table, sipping tea with her back straight and her expression unreadable. "What kind of game are you playing, Amara?" he barked, slamming his keys on the table. She looked up, her gaze steady and unnerving. "There is no game, Yuzo. You've simply lost the privilege of acting like this house, and everything in it revolves around you." He blinked, momentarily disoriented by her calmness. For the first time, he saw a woman who was no longer afraid of his outbursts, no longer bending to his moods. "I am your husband," he declared with misplaced authority. "And I am your wife," she responded. "Not your prisoner, not your furniture, and certainly not your doormat." That exchange marked a new chapter in their home. Amara no longer accepted disrespect masked as confidence. She reclaimed her schedule, her peace, and her decisions. Yuzachukwu noticed how the staff addressed her with a new tone, one of reverence. Even his driver started taking instructions from her first. He hated it, yet could not question it without revealing how little control he had left. In an attempt to reassert himself, Yuzuchukwu started throwing more lavish parties, inviting politicians, celebrities, and socialites into their home. He told anyone who cared to listen that he was the genius behind the empire. Amara never contested his lies publicly. She wore her silence like a gown of dignity, knowing that truth was not always shouted. Sometimes it was unveiled. Meanwhile, she kept all financial transactions under close watch. When he tried to wire money to purchase a luxury yacht in Lagos, he received an automated message. Permission required from account co-signatory. Furious, he called her from his office. "What is the meaning of this, Amara? Why are you controlling my money?" Her voice came through the speaker, steady and cool. "I'm not controlling your money, Yuzuchukwu. I'm protecting our future from your recklessness." That was the first time he truly panicked. He realized he had created a version of her in his mind. A docile, irrelevant woman. But the real Amara had evolved into something far more formidable. And now, she held not just the keys to their assets, but the map to his undoing. Yet, he still couldn't grasp the depth of her resolve. He believed she would eventually forgive him. That all he needed was one grand apology. But Amara wasn't waiting for apologies. She was preparing her final move. Amara sat in her private study one evening, surrounded by file folders and a laptop screen glowing with legal documents. It was the room Yuzuchukwu had always ignored, assuming she used it only for light reading and harmless hobbies. But in truth, that room had become the war room of her quiet resistance. She had hired a financial advisor and a discreet legal team months earlier, and they were already halfway through the process of restructuring the company's ownership. Every contract bore her name as the primary signatory, and every asset, including properties, shares, and logistics vehicles, had been carefully repositioned to sit under a holding company she solely controlled. The irony was sharp. Yuzuchukwu had handed her power in his arrogance, never bothering to understand the documents he signed because he assumed her loyalty would always outweigh his betrayal. Amara chuckled quietly at the thought. She had loved him, yes. She had fought for their future with every fiber of her being. But when love turned into humiliation and loyalty became a leash, she knew she had to choose herself. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about recovery. About reclaiming a womanhood buried beneath the weight of male pride. Yuzuchukwu, unaware of the legal storm building, continued his flamboyant lifestyle. He bought gifts for new girlfriends, flew them to Accra and Cape Town, and changed cars as often as he changed shirts. Each time he made a bold financial decision, he was met with a silent barrier, Amara's signature. His frustration mounted. At first, he thought it was a banking glitch. Then he suspected fraud. Finally, when he demanded answers from his lawyer, the truth hit him like a blow. His wife had quietly become the sole controlling party of all his assets. "That's impossible," he whispered, disbelief clouding his face. "I built this from the ground up." But the lawyer's face remained impassive. "You built it under her name. You trusted her to manage the papers. Legally, she owns everything." Yuzuchukwu staggered back, his mind racing. How had he missed this? How had she outmaneuvered him? His entire empire now stood on a foundation of her decisions. And for the first time, he realized that his betrayal had not just cost him a marriage. It had cost him his kingdom. But it was too late. Amara had transformed from a silent helper into a strategist, from a loyal wife into a powerful gatekeeper. And the gate he once locked her behind had now shut him out. The realization of what he had lost came not as a single crash, but a series of controlled demolitions, each more devastating than the last. Yuzuchukwu returned home that evening to find the driveway empty. His prized black SUV was gone. He rushed inside, barking questions at the housekeeper. who calmly informed him that the vehicle had been collected by agents acting on behalf of the company's new controlling entity. Which controlling entity? He asked, though deep down, he already knew the answer. That night, he sat alone in the living room where he used to host his glamorous mistresses. The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. The echo of Amara's silent presence filled the house like a ghost. She had not left him physically, but her absence in affection and warmth was complete. The woman he used to call my village girl had become a fortress, unreachable, unreadable, and fully in command. The next morning, he tried to access his business accounts, only to find them locked. His office manager called to report that 2 contracts had been redirected. One to a rival company, the other to a new division under Amara's name. It dawned on him, slowly but fatally, that she had not only removed his access, she had started replacing him. Desperate, Yuzachukwu tried to rally the board of his company, only to discover that most of them had already been briefed by Amara. The logistics empire he once flaunted as proof of his greatness had quietly changed hands. Amara had used his own ambition against him, weaponizing the very trust he had taken for granted. He attempted damage control, calling in favors, trying to pull strings, threatening lawsuits. But everything was airtight. Every document was signed. Every transaction was traceable. Every mistake his own. When he stormed into her study to confront her, he found her calmly pouring tea, her face composed. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice cracking not with rage, but with confusion. She met his gaze. "Because I finally understand that love without dignity is slavery. And I refuse to be your slave anymore." He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time in years, not as an accessory to his ego, but as a woman of strength, intelligence, and will. And then it hit him harder than any lawsuit or loss. She had been his greatest asset, and he had spent years devaluing her. Now, she was reclaiming herself, and everything she helped him build, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. The media caught wind of the changes before Yuzachukwu could piece together a proper lie. Headlines circulated. Enugu business tycoon ousted from own company. Amara Uzodinma emerges as silent powerhouse, and wife turned CEO, the woman behind the empire. Overnight, his name became a cautionary tale rather than a badge of success. Invitations to parties ceased. Friends who once toasted to his wealth now avoided his calls. Some, he later discovered, had quietly aligned themselves with Amara. Investors reached out, not to him, but to her. The empire had changed hands, and the world had simply followed the power. Yuzachukwu sat alone in his corner office, staring at the desk where he once made grand plans, now reduced to signing resignation letters and authorizing account transitions. When the building administrator asked for his ID to be turned in by week's end, he felt a hollowness he couldn't explain. Pride, it turned out, had not only blinded him, it had cost him everything. His assistant came in to clear out the last of his belongings. The only thing left on the wall was a framed photo of him and Amara, taken years ago at the company's opening ceremony. She was smiling in it, standing just behind him. He pulled it down and held it, regret clawing at his throat. At home, the silence between them grew heavier than arguments ever could. Amara no longer spoke unless necessary, and when she did, her tone was curt, factual, almost cold. The house felt unfamiliar to him, as if it now belonged to someone else. In truth, it did. Every room, every light fixture, every painting had been selected by her, maintained by her, paid for through systems she had quietly built. She had become a queen in her own right, while he had abdicated the throne for a life of temporary pleasures. And now, he was nothing more than a guest in a palace his wife had preserved while he squandered their trust. He tried to reach her emotionally one night, walking into her room without knocking. She was seated at her dressing table, removing her earrings. "Amara," he said softly, voice trembling. I know I've made mistakes, but can't we go back? She paused, then met his reflection in the mirror. Back to what, Yuzuchukwu? To the nights you brought women into our bed while I cried in the guest room? Or to the mornings you dismissed my voice in boardrooms I helped you build? He had no reply. There was no back to return to. What they had was gone, and all that remained was the echo of a man who had everything, and lost it piece by careless piece. In the weeks that followed, Yuzuchukwu found himself drowning in the consequences of his own neglect. The financial strain was only the beginning. With his name no longer attached to major contracts and his influence waning, many of his side ventures began to fold. Businesses he had started for show, managed poorly and fueled by ego, crumbled without Amara's discreet oversight. Banks that once offered him credit without hesitation now demanded collateral. His personal assistant resigned, citing a change in career path. But he knew the real reason. No one wanted to stay on a sinking ship. Even the women he used to impress with lavish gifts began to disappear, one by one. They had come for his money, his shine, his position. Now that those were gone, so were they. Yuzuchukwu wandered through the house like a ghost, haunted by memories of what he used to be. He often stood outside Amara's study door, hoping to hear her voice, even if just giving instructions. But she had learned to speak softly, to the right people, and only when necessary. Her silence now commanded more than his loudest boasts ever did. Amara, meanwhile, blossomed. Freed from the emotional bondage of her marriage, she turned her focus to the business she had helped build. She began restructuring the company with efficiency and grace, investing in young talent, and sponsoring entrepreneurial programs for women. Her name became synonymous with excellence and empowerment. Interview requests poured in, and though she declined most, her story became a quiet revolution among women who had been silenced for too long. In private, she wept occasionally, not because she missed Yuzuchukwu, but because she mourned the years she gave to a man who saw her as less than she was. Yet each time the tears came, she stood up stronger. She hadn't only survived, she had grown. Her strength was not born from revenge, but from clarity, from finally seeing herself through her own eyes, not his. She wore her success without arrogance, never needing to boast. And that was what hurt Yuzuchukwu the most. He had destroyed her love, but she had not allowed him to destroy her. Instead, she had turned his betrayal into fuel, forging herself into a woman he could no longer reach. The freedom he once mocked in other women was now the very thing that made Amara untouchable. Yuzuchukwu began to frequent places he once disdained, quiet lounges, book cafes, and art galleries, desperate to recapture a sense of relevance. But everywhere he went, he was reminded of Amara. He saw her in the strength of a woman leading a business panel, in the poise of a young girl reciting poetry about dignity, and in the quiet confidence of a mother guiding her child across a street. He started to understand, too late, that Amara hadn't just been a wife. She had been his mirror, showing him who he could be if only he had the courage to grow with her. The realization was bitter. One afternoon, he drove to the edge of Enugu, to the site of a new warehouse development he thought he still had rights to, only to be met with a security guard who told him, "Sir, you need an appointment with the director." The director? His wife? No, his ex-wife in everything but legal form. He drove back with his head spinning, his legacy slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. The empire he once owned was now a monument to the woman he had underestimated. And everywhere he turned, he was no longer king. He was the lesson. At home, the distance between them was now a canyon. Amara had moved her things into the master bedroom, not out of sentiment, but because she had finally reclaimed what was hers. Yuzuchukwu lived out of a guest room on the far side of the house, the one he never used before. The same staff who once jumped at his commands now took their time. Their allegiance quietly but firmly shifted. He noticed small things. Meals were made the way Amara liked them. The garden had been redesigned to her taste. Even the wall art had changed. Portraits of African queens, affirmations of resilience and brilliance. This house, once a symbol of his status, had become a shrine to everything he had failed to appreciate. One night, he stood outside her door, the same way he used to wait for his lovers to arrive. But this time, there was no thrill, only regret. He wanted to knock, to ask for forgiveness, to promise change. But what words could heal years of wounds? What apology could undo betrayal upon betrayal? He turned away, defeated, realizing something that chilled him. Amara no longer hated him. She had outgrown him, and that, more than anything, made her completely unreachable. Amara's transformation was not just personal. It was public and profound. As the controlling force behind the logistics empire, she began to shift company policies to reflect her values. She prioritized fair wages for workers, transparency in contracts, and community engagement. The company sponsored educational programs for young women in Enugu, offering scholarships and mentorship to those who aspired to careers in business and technology. Amara believed that true power was not measured by wealth alone, but by the ability to uplift others. Her leadership style was a blend of discipline and compassion, earning her respect not only within the company, but throughout the local business community. Invitations to speak at conferences and universities flooded her inbox, though she accepted only a few, always careful to stay true to her humble roots. To many, she was the embodiment of resilience, an example that no matter how deep the betrayal, a person could rise stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Meanwhile, Uzechukwa's days were spent in quiet reflection and regret. He watched from the sidelines as the woman he once scorned flourished. The empire he had built on ambition and greed was now a beacon of hope and integrity under Amara's guidance. His attempts to rekindle their relationship were met with polite distance. She had no interest in revisiting the past. The community, too, shifted its allegiance. Where once men boasted of Uzechukwa's conquests and riches, they now spoke of Amara's vision and strength. It was a revolution not fought with weapons or protests, but with dignity and unwavering resolve. Uzechukwa was left to grapple with a truth he had never learned. True success was not about possession or power over others, but about honor, respect, and the courage to change. As he sat alone in the dim light of his study, the weight of his mistakes settled upon him. He was a man who had everything, and yet he had lost the most precious thing of all. One quiet evening, Amara stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights of Enugu, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the nights spent silent and lonely, the sacrifices made in the name of love and growth, and the bitter lessons learned through betrayal. But most of all, she thought about the future, her own and the generations of women who would come after her. She vowed never to let herself be diminished again, nor to allow any woman to suffer in silence. The strength she had forged was not just for her, but for all who needed a beacon in the dark. Her success was a testament to the power of resilience, to the courage it takes to stand tall when the world tries to knock you down. With every business deal she closed, every scholarship she awarded, she rewrote the narrative of what it meant to be a wife, a leader, and a woman in modern Africa. Meanwhile, Uzechukwa's world had shrunk to the confines of regret. He tried to rebuild his life, but the shadow of Amara's triumph loomed large over every step he took. The social circles that once embraced him had moved on, and he was left to confront the consequences of his choices in solitude. One afternoon, he found himself outside a community center where Amara was speaking to a group of young entrepreneurs. He watched from a distance as she inspired others with stories of hardship and hope, her voice steady and confident. The woman he had tried to break was now a symbol of strength and empowerment, and he realized that his attempts to regain control were futile. He was a man who had lost not only his empire, but the respect of the woman who had once been his partner. And in that moment, he understood that some lessons could only be learned through loss and reflection. Amara sat at the head of a long, mahogany conference table in the new corporate headquarters. Her headquarters. The glass windows stretched across the walls behind her, showcasing the skyline of Enugu, a view she once admired quietly from the sidelines. Now, it was hers to command. She had just concluded a successful quarterly meeting with investors, all of whom were impressed by her vision and execution. The company's numbers had doubled in growth under her leadership, and several regional branches were opening soon. After the meeting, a young intern approached her with timid admiration in her eyes and asked, "Ma, how did you do it?" Amara smiled, a blend of warmth and wisdom on her face. "I remembered who I was," she replied simply, "and I stopped asking for permission to be her." Those words stayed with the intern for days. Amara was not just leading a company. She was inspiring a movement. Women who had once hidden their talents behind the shadows of their husbands or societal expectation were now daring to dream, because she had dared first. Back home, Yuzachukwu found the emptiness more suffocating by the day. He sat in the guest room that had become his permanent space, thumbing through old photo albums. Each image told a story of a man who had once been adored, cherished, even idolized by a woman who saw beyond his flaws. But he had weaponized her love, using it as a shield to cover his infidelities and a ladder to elevate his ego. Now, the woman in those pictures was gone. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. She had outgrown him in every way possible. The house he had once ruled had become a mausoleum of his own failure. One evening, he overheard a conversation between the staff praising Amara for organizing a medical outreach in her village. "She has a heart for the people," one said. "I've never worked for someone so strong, yet so kind." Yuzachukwu felt a pain deeper than pride could bandage. The respect he once demanded, she now earned effortlessly. It was in that moment he realized, power without integrity was a performance. Amara had stopped performing long ago. Now, she was simply living her truth, and it was a truth too brilliant for him to dim ever again. Months passed, and the divorce papers arrived at last, neatly signed and delivered by Amara's legal team with a courteous but emotionless note. For closure, not conflict. Yuzachukwu stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, as though the seal contained remnants of the love he had destroyed. When he finally did, he found no angry letter, no scathing rebuke, just a clean, professional severance of all legal and emotional ties. No battle over property or custody. She didn't even ask for spousal support. She already owned the assets. What she wanted, what she had finally claimed, was her peace. That quiet hurt more than any confrontation ever could. Yuzachukwu had spent his life believing that control equaled love, that dominance equaled power. But Amara had redefined everything. She didn't need to yell to be heard, nor did she need to argue to prove her worth. Her silence was its own verdict, and it left him aching in ways words never could. Amara, on the other hand, felt lighter. The finality of the divorce was not the end. It was a transition, a shedding of the last thread tethering her to a man who had tried to drain her light. Her energy was now poured fully into her foundation, Women Who Rise, an initiative aimed at helping women in abusive, neglectful, or limiting marriages find financial and emotional independence. She visited rural communities, met with governors, and partnered with banks to create loan programs for women entrepreneurs. Wherever she went, she carried herself with dignity and warmth, never sharing the details of her own pain unless it served to encourage another woman. Her strength was no longer a reaction to betrayal. It had evolved into purpose. At night, she sometimes sat on her veranda, sipping zobo under the stars, her heart at peace. She no longer dreamed of love as rescue, nor did she romanticize suffering in the name of marriage. She had rescued herself, and that was enough. Her story was no longer about what was done to her, but what she chose to do afterward. Yuzachukwu walked through a city that no longer remembered him. Faces that once nodded in admiration now barely glanced his way. He had become a cautionary tale, the once mighty man brought low not by fate, but by his own hands. His business connections had thinned out. Those who once crowded around him at events now shifted uncomfortably when he approached. Some pitied him, others avoided him, most simply moved on. But the worst part wasn't the silence of others. It was the voice in his own mind. Every corner of his home whispered her name. Every news article on her successes was a reminder of what he had forfeited. Amara's foundation was now operating across 3 states, and her image graced magazine covers and billboards, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of hope. Yuzachukwu would pause in front of them, staring. His heart, once hardened by ego and entitlement, now cracked open with guilt. He wanted to apologize, not to win her back. He knew that door was long closed, but to say for the first time that he finally saw her, that he finally saw himself. Amara received his letter on a Tuesday, slipped discreetly into her office mailbox. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she placed it on her desk and continued her meeting. She had long learned that some wounds shouldn't be reopened, especially when healing had already begun. But later that evening, curiosity and closure guided her hands. The letter was brief, handwritten in a shaky scrawl that tried too hard to sound humble. He said he was sorry for everything, for the years of neglect, the betrayal, the arrogance, and for mistaking her love for weakness. He didn't ask for a response, only hoped she would one day believe that he regretted it all. She sat with the letter for a long time, not because she was emotional, but because it was confirmation of her journey. She had fought battles in silence, prayed through pain, and emerged with a soul that could read such a letter and not be moved to hate. She didn't reply, not because she was cold, but because some goodbyes are best left unspoken. She folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and closed it gently, like a door that would never open again. The day Amara was honored with a national award for her contributions to women's empowerment, the entire auditorium stood to its feet in a resounding ovation. Dressed in a simple yet elegant encre gown that blended modern style with ancestral grace, she walked to the stage with the poise of a queen and the humility of a servant leader. Cameras flashed, but Amara's mind was on the faces in the crowd. The young girl from a village school who had sent her a handwritten letter saying, "I want to be strong like you." The widowed trader who now owned 2 shops thanks to her business grants. The abused wife who had walked away with nothing but hope and now trained others to do the same. These were her trophies. The plaque she received was just a symbol. As she gave her speech, her voice steady and rich, she didn't mention her ex-husband, not once. Not out of malice, but because he no longer occupied her story. Her journey had grown beyond the pain. "We are not just survivors," she said to the crowd. "We are architects of our futures. And no one, no man, no tradition, no betrayal, can take that power from us." Somewhere across town, Yuzachukwu watched the broadcast alone in a bar he now frequented more out of habit than pleasure. He clutched a half-finished bottle of beer, the buzz dull compared to the ache in his chest. The announcer praised Amara's transformation from the quiet wife of a businessman to a national icon, and the room erupted in cheers. But none louder than the one inside Yuzachukwu's mind, the echo of all he had thrown away. In that moment, he saw everything clearly. Amara had not just risen from his betrayal, she had transcended it. She had created something lasting, something honorable. While he had chased fleeting pleasure, she had built a legacy. And now, she had become the kind of woman that every man wished he had loved better. As he sat in the corner of that bar, forgotten by the world he once ruled, he wept. Not because he wanted her back, but because he finally understood. Some women are the blessing you misuse, and by the time you realize their worth, they've become too powerful to need you anymore. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and turn on post notification for more exciting stories.